stream on as well. We're gonna put this to YouTube as well, live streaming, just to make sure that we capture the great ideas of our speakers tonight. And we will have no less than 4 amazing speakers from different parts of the world, talking about open source, business, how to integrate them, and how to kind of be part of the landscape, the global landscape that we have today in terms of collaboration and industry impact. So this is a joint event between 3 different meetup groups. So we kind of wanted to, try a little bit, see how it's going, and then kind of get different types of minds together. So between Cloud Native Finland, or Kubernetes Finland meetup group, yesterday we organized Kubernetes community days at the OP, so one of the biggest banks in Finland, headquarters with 300 people. And lots of, we had 40 speakers from different places talking about Kubernetes, Cloud Native, and that kind of server management area. And then we have the open source program office meetup in Helsinki, also as one of the joint organizers of this event. And then finally, of course, where we are today, Startup Sauna and Aalto Entrepreneurship Society as one of the organizers. So yeah, if you are interested in the cloud native parts, the whole conference yesterday was recorded as well. We had, there's 13 hours of content that's going to come out on YouTube soon, in a couple of weeks. Everything from how to get started with Kubernetes from early, for example, to how to be in a community, to very deep dive technical talks on how to kind of do something more specific. And yeah, then during this evening, please, we'll have networking breaks. So we're going to have 4 different talks, each 15, 20 minutes, something like that. But this is meetup, so it's not very strict schedule. We'll play it by ear, and then between the talks, we're going to have networking breaks. So please do talk to each other, talk to the speakers. Don't be shy. And then we'll end off with a panel between all of the 4 speakers, and I'll be moderating. Then bring your hardest questions about open source. I was really happy to see all of the questions that were submitted in beforehand. That really warmed my heart. They were very good questions. I think some of them that hard that we will have a hard time giving super good answers. Well, let's see. It's going to be a challenge. So we'll take both questions from the stage, then at the end of the panel, and from the pre-registered questions. What else? I think, yeah, that's probably it. And then you can tell about Aaltoes a little bit.
Hello everyone, I'm going to represent Aaltoes this event. We are Aalto Entrepreneurship Society, and this year our agenda is kind of close to open source, and I'm going to talk about our new program. This would be some small announcement that no one else heard yet. Yes, so you will be the first ones. This year, our president likes to start all talks by saying this is the most technology-driven year in the community. Why he says so? Because we are going to have different programs. For example, Robotics Nation, Project Silkway. But today, I'm going to talk particularly about these 3 things. So, why it is tech-driven? Because we are going to organize our open source program. This will be our own GitHub organization, which never happened to our community before. We will organize more hackathons for students and anyone who is interested. And we have billet sessions. Billet sessions are just comfortable coding sessions, like people can just join and chill, and we will provide some food and drinks, and just code, and that's it. We just want people to build something. But sometimes we will also announce some kind of challenges. which will take like 2 weeks, and the first challenge will be actually announced in our Telegram channel tomorrow. Yeah, about open source. I already talked a bit about, but what is this open source program about? So if you have, the most important for us is to build community. Yeah, I really liked the speech of Sarah yesterday, where she was talking about how community is important, but how we are gonna support it. So, as I said, we will have our GitHub organization where we will provide guidance, help with documentation, and look for mentors to help you with projects. If you have some project which is have some potential, we will provide you with resources, for example, subscriptions to any services that you need. Maybe, not maybe, we will cover costs for servers and everything that you need. You just need to share with us your idea. Build it, as I already said, we are going to have it much more frequently, and we will give challenges. And hackathons, we actually had some hackathon already a month ago, and it was really good about computer vision, but we will conduct even more. But for that one, we need to look for sponsors and partners, and if there is any company that is interested to partner with us here, you can just reach us out. So, the most importantly, we have these two forms with which you can get involved with us. The first one is application with your project proposal. So here you need to send us a document explaining your idea. More particularly, you can find information here. So I explain in terms of the program. And here, this is application for volunteering in our hackathons only and build-it sessions. And also, if you are a company, or if you want to give us any guest lecture that is related to programming, development, or anything. So make sure to take a photo of those, but I will share it in our social medias, but it will just take some time. This is me. I'm currently lead of technology at Aaltoes. So if you have any questions related to technology, our programs, you can just reach me out and even connect to me if you want on LinkedIn. These are our community channels, just for those ones who doesn't have it yet. We have Discord, Telegram channel, and Telegram chat. Yeah, this was basically it that I wanted to share with you all. Thank you for listening, and I hope you will enjoy this evening.
Awesome. So then it's time for our first speaker, esteemed Sarah Novotny. Sarah is one of the, you could say, one of the first employees at Amazon when like under 400, employee number 400 in 1997. Then went on to do lots of other things in the server management space, has been a board member of the Linux Foundation, been at Google when building the Kubernetes community in the beginning of 2015, and so was part of creating the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, which today underpins essentially all of the server management space in the community, open source community these days, and then was one of the kind of office of the CTO people at Microsoft Azure most recently. So give it up for Sarah Novotny.
Aalto for hosting this and all of the different groups that have come together. It is very dear to me when you get multiple communities working together. This may be a surprise if any of you saw this yesterday, or after you hear this talk, it'll also make a lot of sense why I talk a lot about collaboration. So let's make these things go forward. So today I'm going to focus on trust and open source and trusting in open source, trusting software in general, and then also a little bit of how you can build that trust in your communities as you're actually building software. So let's start with the definition that I'm going to use for trust here, which is reliability, truth, and ability of something or someone. So this is a trust in something. This is trust as a noun, and this is the way that we evaluate if something is going to do the things we expect in a timely manner over a period of time and consistently. So you may have noticed, and in fact I suspect some of you have been in this world less long than we've been doing big technology, or even than I've been doing big technology, which is terrifying. But software is everywhere. Everything you touch today involves software. And that is really important because we trust software to drive us to our events in the evening. We trust software to make sure our banking works. We trust software to make sure our airplanes fly. And all of this is really important because A, we like living, B, we like being able to pay our own rent, and C, we want to make sure that the things that we expect happen as it's important. But really, how do you think about trust in this sense? Trust is an agreement between multiple parties. So any API is a contract between two pieces of software. Any interface, any standard, these are contracts. They're not legal contracts, but they certainly are contracts that we need to rely on. So a friend of mine wrote a great book. He actually, I believe, he was part of the founding of the Confidential Computing Consortium. I'm going to get that out poorly. The Confidential Computing Consortium. And he wrote a book about trust in cloud computing. All right, so how many of you have heard security conversations talking about, like, Alice talks to Bob, who talks to Charlie? Okay, you've heard these things. All right. Well, it's usually done with the alphabet so that you know how far you get. So when Mike wrote this book, his introduction moved me incredibly because basically he said, we get halfway through the alphabet before we even talk about a human touching something. So these levels of trust that we offer to software, the expectation that we have of these pieces of software, of these tools that we use, is pretty incredible. And we're able to evaluate these things because we see longevity, because we see that cloud computing now works pretty consistently. But 10 years ago, cloud computing was in alpha and beta stages. 12 years ago, you were hard-pressed to convince a large enterprise that you would want to put your servers through this level of trust complexity or trust chain. So we know that open source underpins most software today. So who's written a math library that was not for a class? Anybody written a math library for a class even? Oh, you have. Congratulations. We've had a couple of people who have had to write math libraries. Generally, we don't do things like write these underlying components of software because we trust the libraries that are out there, because they've been used for 20 years, because they've been evaluated by experts who are surely smarter than I am. And you see them evaluated by hundreds and thousands of tens of thousands of people who actually make them better. This is one of the principles of open source, is that one of the laws is all, this was an Eric Raymond statement, that all bugs are shallow when you have enough eyes. So this is something that we have to think about, because at the moment, even commercial code is more than 75% open source code by lines of code. So all of those things, someone says NPM include this, NPM include the other thing, NPM include the whole world. That's terrifying, but there are places that this happens. All of that is an example of trust, that those tools will be there forever, that those tools will be accurate, and that they'll do the things you expect them to. So the challenge in this is that currently most organizations can't tell you what's in the software they're shipping. It's getting a little bit better in the last couple of years because we've had some really scary events in open source and in software broadly. Let's not actually single out open source here. But this problem of these dependencies and the trust that is given to these dependencies really, really makes us have to think thoroughly about how we build open source software. So let me start with a premise here. Open source is not free like sunshine. It is not going to always be there exactly as you need it, perfect. You can't demand it to be sunny on a given day, even if there has been rain in the morning, but it's not free like sunshine. You have to think about it as free like a puppy. When you take that puppy home, you need to be willing to train it, to pay attention to it, to submit bugs against the repo it was once housed in, to make sure that you are willing to take it to the vet and do a security audit on it. I'm mixing my metaphors here, so apologies, but the point is that you can't say it's free and there's nothing more I need to do. It is free, and you are responsible for how you use open source software once you bring it into your own piece of code. So, fundamentally, open source is inside almost everything. I've only been a couple of places where I've asked for people to put up their hands and said, who's written a math library? A couple of times it's happened and people are going, yeah, we did, because we needed it for some reason. But most people rely on the primitives in their languages, in their package ecosystem, and more broadly in open source. So here's the thing. It's not just code. It doesn't live there in a vacuum, because humans build software. I do have a little asterisk up there for the reason that everyone here has probably heard of vibe coding, and that AIs are going to take over the world, eat our software, possibly turn us all into paper clips, and maybe someday be able to build things that we were not able to conceive of. I'm not sure we're there yet. Actually, no, I'm sure we're not there yet. But we need to keep humans in the middle, because until we have longevity across these contracts, we don't know what is being built. We need to be evaluating it, we need to be using it, we need to be responsible for it. So let's presume that humans at least are in the middle of this code building, and we can say they build software. So building software beyond a small project means that we need to build mutual, reliable, truthful, and able communities, as well as the software that we're building. So in this, we need to make sure that we are not only making strong contracts within the way we build our software, but within the groups that we use to build software, or the groups we use to build events, or to build communities, or to share knowledge. So we need to spend some time building trust. One of the easiest ways in open source to build trust is to make no sudden moves. Now, some of you may have run across commentary about activism in open source, where someone makes a change in order to say, use all the CPUs that are in Russia that deploy this piece of code. That would be clever, interesting, activist, but not trustworthy, not something that you need, something you can rely on. And this is one of those spaces where open source has gotten a bit of a bad rap recently, because there has been a lot of activism. There also are the risks of bad actors in open source. So making no sudden moves is an important starting point for how you are able to run communities, projects, and build that long-term reliability, trustworthiness, and integrity. In these groups, documenting decision-making also helps you build trust. Both build trust with the community that you're working with or that you're building with, as well as the community of users who may be consuming this. They understand how decisions were made. They understand what the trade-offs were, how things were concluded. In these communities, you also need to find and reward the behaviors that you want more of. So if someone puts in a pull request and it's great and you just say merge but never reach out to them, never say hi, this is super cool, never reward that human connection, you're going to get less contributions than you might if you're actually spending time rewarding these behaviors that you want to encourage. So rewards can be a variety of things. I usually use the classic 4 of gamification: status, access, power, and stuff. So status would be giving someone a new role or a title within an organization or within a community. Access would be, hey, did you want to meet this super cool person that this person you were really awed by? Giving them access to things, giving access to resources, as we heard just a moment ago, that the Entrepreneurship Society is going to give access to resources. Status, access, power. You can make the decisions. You get to review that code and then merge it when it comes in. That gives you some amount of power in these communities. And then stuff ends up being tribal affiliations, things, objects, so maybe it's stickers. I often say that open source runs on stickers and chocolate, and I use that liberally. Of course, you're all going to say, do you have any stickers today? And I'm sorry, I don't. But usually I'm carrying stickers of some sort or another from a project. But you want to use rewards to help people feel valued in a project. It's a really incredible tool when an individual is trying to engage with a community and then feels that reward, feels seen, feels as if they're being valued for their participation. You also need to make space for creativity. So in these pieces of software, in these open source communities, in these other communities that you build, if you delegate or ask someone to do something, you can't then micromanage and make it be exactly the way you might have done it. You need to leave space for those other people to have their own ideas, have their own ways of coming to a solution, and then be happy with it. Again, thank them for their efforts. Work with them. All of this is building upon a trusted community. Then there are a couple of pieces that are super important here as I sort of wrap up the what do you do to build trust in a community. You need to seek out new perspectives. You are a fairly young crowd on average. So how many of you know about the health app on iPhones? When the health app first came out, it tracked a whole bunch of stuff. It was really cool. But interestingly enough, and possibly, though not guaranteed, possibly because it was mostly a male engineering team, there was no way to track a really important fact of women's lives. There was no way to track a menstrual cycle in this, which is an important health point. But because that team didn't have the perspective of women who would say, hey, this is something we would like to know. This relates to our health. It was not included. So you have enormous blind spots when you talk about having singular perspectives or even homogeneous perspectives. So you want to seek new perspectives, and then the hard part happens, because I can bring in someone in who has a very different background or history or gender than me. That's the easy part. But then you need to be empathetic to that experience. You need to listen to it, you need to value it, and you need to understand that where you sit in a social graph gives you incredibly different perspectives. Someone on an edge node, someone way out here that isn't very connected, is going to see things completely differently than someone who is in the center of a cluster, someone who is participating and active in a very different way. Their experiences are going to be incredibly different. So within Kubernetes, when we were building the community, we spent our time trying to establish the values of the community so that we could make better decisions. And some of you who may have heard this talk or heard a different talk yesterday did hear a bit about this. Because setting up values as a tool to make decisions is really important. So within Kubernetes, if we came to a hard decision, and it was like, okay, so we want to make this change, and that actually may end up centralizing control into something. Well, we could go back to the values and say, you know what? We value distribution over centralization. Or somebody says, well, we've always done it that way. I don't think I want to change it. We value improvement over stagnation. And so these values help different projects, different groups of people make decisions without leaning too heavily on singular leaders in these spaces. Now, I've done this value process a couple of different ways and with a couple of different groups. This group is actually the Node.js community coming together, and they're all writing on sticky notes what they think the community stands for. They're all writing, you know, this is important, and I think this is important. And then we ended up clustering, pulling together all of these different things that different perspectives thought was valuable in the community, and coming to a list that ended up representing what was really important to the Node.js community. And this ended up helping us decide that it could be aligned with another community when we were doing work merging two different foundations and the governance around Node.js and another half dozen or dozen projects in the JavaScript Foundation. So being able to identify what is important to you individually, and then being able to identify what is important for the group you are trying to build, actually helps you make decisions. So this ends up being the list of values that they came up with. It was a lot longer than we thought initially, and we distilled it a lot further, but that was some of the conversations we had and some of the distillation that we got. So fundamentally, as you're building a community and as you're building tools that need to offer this transitive trust from piece of software to next piece of software, from the cloud network to the cloud hardware, to the cloud virtual machine, to the software inside of it. As you need these tools to behave in a consistent manner, you need to build in that same way so that you can show that you value trust in what you're building and show this over time in order to really help us. So I really recommend and know and believe and have fostered that if you build a shared culture in a trusting community and that gives us a resilient organization that allows us to actually build amazing things. But the key point here is it's amazing because we build them together. And it's amazing and bigger and even more impactful because we have these strong contracts at all of these different trust boundaries, another security term, and we are able to go ahead and expect that our money, when transferred from one bank account to another, arrives there. Because it is no longer based on whether you trust that the teller wrote it down properly in a ledger and then picked up and moved some currency from place A to place B. So we have to have this trust in software. And the only way to get that over long term is to build in a trustworthy manner. So thank you, and please keep building together. I have a bit of homework in case you want to do this during the networking project. I used some of these slides in what was called the Maintainers Leadership Circle for Kubernetes, probably about 5 years ago. And in that, we took a bunch of maintainers from different parts of the project and got them together and said, take a really hard thing that happened in your community and try to break it down. Think through what you really wish you'd known. Think about what was missing in the information as you had it, as the time happened. And then, of course, figure out if there is a principle or a value that could have made this decision or this process clearer to you. And then for fun, since the discussion part was the hard part, frame it in terms of the last sentence of a story. So this may be homework for you all during the networking time if you feel like it, if you want to talk about some interesting stuff. Or I'm also open to questions, because we've got a couple of minutes if we want to do some questions. Okay. I can repeat them too for the live stream, so how about you?
We have
Oh, we have microphones as well. Thank you.
It's high-tech university.
High-tech universities. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for the talk. I have a question about rewards.
Mm-hmm.
So, what about salary?
Ah.
Everybody has bills to pay.
Yes, no, salary is a very important part of life. Yes, everyone has bills to pay. My country, for sure, has not figured out universal basic income or anything near it. So when I talk about rewards in the context of open source, usually you are working across multiple companies, and so you have no control, or multiple individuals who aren't part of a company. So I would have no control in an open source community over your salary. I could occasionally participate in your performance review if you invited me or your company invited me to participate. But for the most part, when I talk about this trust, I talk about it in terms of influence. But you're right, salary is a great way that development within a single company or single organization that has a unified hierarchy, it's a great tool to incentivize people. Now, there are studies that have shown that many people work on open source software for the freedom, for the orthogonal nature to their day job, if they have a day job, and that it can occasionally really throw out of balance an open source community if a portion of it is drawing a salary and a portion is not, or if you offer rewards for particular features. There's some research on this where it doesn't always go as you would expect. But thanks for the question.
Great, thanks. Can I ask another?
If there are not more questions, could we jump on? We can chat more during the break too.
Yeah, we don't have free breaks, so no worries.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for the talk. When you started with talking about trust, a question came to my mind immediately that when we talk about trust, and we talk about it today, and it's mainly trusting in open source, but it may give the question of, okay, if I'm in open source, how can I build trust to the users of my tool, of my project? Because as an example, Node.js community, Kubernetes communities, all of them are very big, and at least, I don't know exactly, most of them are people paid by companies, and they are already employed creating communities, which is great, but there are communities that are only volunteer-based, and how can people put their trust in the community, and how can they be taken care of?
Generally, that starts with the founder of the project and sharing that vision, being transparent, making no sudden moves, continuing to bring your friends into the project, getting your friends to bring people into the project. It really comes through influence first, and that influence is both on the organization level, but then on the public level out to your potential end users. Sometimes it ends up happening because you put an interesting piece of code into a common package system that already has a community. Sometimes it happens because you give a talk at an event and say, hey, I'm working on a thing. Would you like to join me in this project? Sometimes it happens through adoption of a very large project. So there were some much smaller projects that as Kubernetes got engaged with them, they got much bigger. So it ends up being a lot about that consistency, that presence, that public face of the project at a minimum, but often the project, the founder, and the leaders of it. It's not an easy task.
No, I know.
Yeah. Do you want to say what your project is that you're trying to get more attention for?
It's not necessarily me, but I'm contributing to GIMP nowadays, and that's been a project that's been around for
GIMP's been around a long time. Yeah.
And it's still seen only as a cheap replacement for Photoshop.
Yep.
Which it is not exactly.
This ends up being a space for potentially people to advocate on behalf of it and speak or write or show what you've built with it, that kind of thing. It ends up being that balance point of that influence. Yeah. Okay, more questions?
Do we have questions from this
Oh, this side, yes.
The last one.
The last question, okay.
Then we have a dedicated panel as
Yeah.
well.
That's true. We will have more questions right now.
Thank you for the talk. I just have questions about the vibe coding and open source.
Vibe coding and open source. Woo, hot topic.
Yeah, I think it's crazy times. I mean, my grandmother can actually vibe code right now, so it's crazy.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily put your grandma's vibe coded app out on the web right now, though, just in case. Yeah,
She's capable.
she's capable. Okay, cool.
So, like, my question is that what do you think is the impact of vibe coding and open source in terms of negative and positive? I think.
Vibe coding on open source. It is a really interesting and contested space right now, because some projects have said that they will not allow AI-generated code into them. Not that there's any way to prove this, one way or another. Many of those projects who have said it can't be AI generated also then say, since we can't prove it, you are responsible for this. So you are responsible for the developer certificate of origin saying you have the rights to put this code in, whatever that means in the land of AI. But you also see that, so that's sort of one of the ways that it's showing up. It's showing up as individuals contributing on behalf of something that they say did in cursor, or they got VS Code to help them fix a bug, whatever. But you are still saying, on my trustworthiness, I am saying I can contribute this code, that I know that it is as good as code that I would write, and that I am offering my transitive trust to this, and the responsibility still falls to you. We have seen some negative impacts in that there are people and projects that are really excited about AI and going around trying to fix a whole pile of stuff and doing automated submissions for bug fixes or error reports, or doing bug discovery with AI and submitting issues into open source. And a lot of them are really turning out to be very spammy. They're not super useful. They might or might not actually fix the thing they said that they were trying to fix. It might or might not be a problem. So again, really mixed reviews, fairly frustrated though, for that side. And then I think the third way we see AI impacting open source at the moment is an unknown sense of how this affects trademarks. Not trademarks.
Intellectual property?
Intellectual property. Thank you. I'm like, what is that word? Your IP and the actual ability for you to assign your rights to that piece of code to projects that require rights assignment. So the same problem, to be fair, although at a much slower pace, happened with copy-paste from Stack Overflow. So did you have the rights? Well, there was a human in the middle, and that human attested that this was, that they did have the rights, and then you could or could not figure out at some point later if it was a problem. So those are sort of three places that it's at least a challenge. The thing that I think gives me optimism is this is the absolute worst AI is going to be. Good God, I hope. And it will get better only from here, which is important to consider. But it is not yet something that this is why I framed trust in terms of the human trust of this. Because if you're using AI to do things, that's great. But you still are the person who is responsible for it. There is no deflection of that responsibility. Or if there is a deflection of this responsibility, this is where we get into things like agentic AI. If there's a deflection of responsibility to maybe an agent that is performing these things, how does that even work? One of the things I do is I'm part of a Coalition for Secure AI project, and I'm working on things like, if I set an agent to go do things, does my identity go with the things I asked it to do, and how am I responsible for that? Are they responsible for it? If the tool is responsible, it's really hard to make tools responsible for anything. We know that guns don't kill people, people kill people. We know that crowbars don't break windows, the person holding the crowbar breaks the window. So how do we translate this to an age of AI? And that's a really big open question right now. Thank you all.
Yes. Cool. Then we'll have 20-25 minutes of break, and there's some snacks over there. So go and do some networking, and we'll be back in a minute. let's continue with our second of 4 speakers tonight. Ricardo is working at CERN with their infrastructure and well, keeping it all together, developing it, and making sure scientists get stuff done. Ricardo, when I first met him, it was in Barcelona, KubeCon Barcelona in 2019. He, on the keynote stage, at KubeCon, showed how the Higgs boson could be rediscovered in 20 minutes. So like, yeah, the keynote stage, they had petabytes, exabytes, I don't know how much of data that they kind of put through, like they analyzed during that keynote talk, and they were showing how they did it with Kubernetes, and keynote data and the live data and was analyzed, and well, you had discovered it in 15 minutes time. So Ricardo did continue to do other stuff as well, such as chairing the Kubernetes conference, KubeCon, to which there comes like 13. The last one was 13,000 people in. Now it was in London, like just a month or so ago. And then, as part of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, one of the kind of foundations that take care of these server management technologies is part of the Technical Oversight Committee, which now the CNCF has like over 200 is the latest, I think, projects that they host, and Ricardo helps kind of nurture these as part of the Technical Oversight Committee, accept the different projects and make sure that they are healthy. So this is going to be a really good presentation about how making sure that like hundreds of thousands or millions of people can collaborate together more practically through one of the foundations. Thank you. Take it away.
Thank you, and thanks for the invitation. Yeah, so I'll do the TLDR of the talk, which is why something like the CNCF and this community is so important for CERN. If we look back, we are in 2025. I started working 20 years ago in these kind of things, and when I joined CERN, we were actually building everything ourselves. And we still build some of the stuff ourselves. But if you think back 20 years, which I know is very hard given the average age here, but there were very few people having big data. It wasn't something that you would hear on every single conference, meetup, things like this. But we did have. But because there was not such a need to analyze and deal with these things, we're actually building everything ourselves, which has a huge cost. And this has been the biggest change I've seen since I started working in this, is that with the advent of cloud and the easy access to like really large amounts of resources, suddenly everyone had the capacity, the potential to do something with large amounts of data. But it has a huge cost to deal with this yourselves. So people have gathered in communities like the CNCF and others to try to solve the problem together. And my role was to be a software developer in multiple projects, storage, monitoring, and compute. And my role now is actually to put pieces together that a lot of other people are working on. So it really changed the way we do computing today. And it also makes it possible to do a lot more stuff than we used to do. So this is really the summary of this talk. What I will go into a little bit more detail is how this actually works. It takes a lot of effort from different people. And the goal is to establish the trust you need, and that Sarah was explaining in a very nice way. Not only to contribute, but to actually depend on all these projects. And you need to have a process to guarantee that this trust is sustainable. So just very briefly, this is how the CNCF looks like. If you have questions, there's Daniel, there's Mirko here. They are actually from the CNCF, so they will tell you more about it. But these are the pieces that people rely on to do different tasks that are needed. So there's the part that takes care of the funding to make sure the organization keeps going, the marketing and setting the direction. This is the governing board. And then there's the part which is the governance of the projects, to make sure that the ecosystem is healthy, that we have a way for projects to evolve in their maturity. There's a question about GIMP. How do we get these projects to be sustainable long-term and help them grow? And this is where different people, myself included, from multiple organizations come in and try to help this out. And then there's the end users, which I'm also part of. There's many end users in the CNCF. Everyone that is using a project in practice is an end user. There's also the CNCF end user that gives you additional perks. But in reality, if you're using a CNCF project, you are an end user. And end users are, if you ask me, the core part of this. All of this exists because people are actually using the projects. They wouldn't be, none of this would be real if people wouldn't actually be using the projects in practice. So the CNCF has a lot of projects. It started with Kubernetes, I guess everyone heard of Kubernetes, yeah? But things escalated pretty quickly. So this is a graph that is usually shown. We are now over 200 projects, and you can see that there was a slow growth the first couple of years, slow for the terms that came after. It's still quite impressive, and then it just keeps rising. And there's this, there's been other efforts before as well, and there's always this idea, it's the hype, it will slow down. Doesn't seem like it's slowing down, and it's been now celebrating almost 10 years for the foundation. You can also see that projects have different maturity levels, and I will talk a little bit more about that after. You can also see that the projects are from a wide range of adoption, but also involvement from people. So there are projects like Kubernetes, which is at the core of the whole ecosystem, that have a high number of contributors, and a high number of adopters, of course. But then you see a lot more projects there, and you can go, I will give you the link to where this data is available, and this list continues. And it's really interesting to see how projects that you see now quite at the top, if you've been involved in the community, you see how they grew over time. They started as small things, maybe from one company, or even a couple of users, or people in one company pushing for them, and then they get adoption and they grow, and this gets really, really interesting to follow. Now, the problem, of course, is that projects go through cycles themselves as well. They will start with a lot of interest, a lot of engagement, but then when things get, as time passes and there's less excitement, you have to make sure that the project remains sustainable and people just don't leave and go do something else. They will, but someone has to keep it running as well. So this is what the process is also about. I'll give you an example of this. So this is the Kubernetes. Kubernetes is, of course, huge. You can see the number of contributors in the last 12 months, almost 10,000 people contributing to the project. Number of commits, pull requests, you see all this data. There you have the link here, it's called LFX Insights, a very nice tool from the Linux Foundation. But what is interesting is seeing where these contributors are coming from. And the LFX also produces this data that says the top organizations doing 50% of the work, and then the rest of the organizations. And you can see like the top 4 doing 50% of the work in Kubernetes is, you see Google, Red Hat, Microsoft, and Intel. Now, I've been working in IT for a long time. If you would ask me 20 years ago, is Google, Red Hat, and Microsoft going to be collaborating in the same project? I would give you an answer immediately. So when I started getting involved in this community and seeing these people working and happily together, it's quite spectacular. And I think it's the biggest contribution of this whole effort is how it got companies together, and you make best friends from companies that are actually competing quite aggressively with each other. But they saw the value of this principle that I was saying, which is together you build better things. You can add more value to whatever you're interested on by working together. And this is very clear. But you have these 4 big companies, but then you have a huge list of other companies. So in the case of Kubernetes, there's over 1,100 organizations contributing. And these are vendors. They can be end users like CERN or any other end user. And it's quite amazing what has been built and how everyone is actually managing to work together in this way. Now, Kubernetes is, of course, one of the best examples because it's a large project. But I will ask, for example, a slightly smaller project called Argo, which is also very popular. Who has heard of Argo? Okay, so half of the room. Argo has over 5,000 contributors, and it has 4 organizations. But the names of these organizations, you have Red Hat there, but it might be that you don't know Intuit or Equity, especially if you're in Europe. But actually this project was created by a company called Intuit that realized that it was a strategic decision for them to donate this project to be maintained by a larger community, because they understood that by themselves it would be too costly and they would never achieve all the potential that the project could have. So they came forward, donated the project, started creating a community around it, and it's now a huge project with over 5,000 people. And, and you see here the top 4, but you see the next 800 organizations that have contributed to the project in the last 12 months. And this is quite spectacular. Like one end user company, not even making money out of this project, understood that it had to build a community to go forward. Now, I will give you another example, which is a project called Container SSH. And I mentioned it yesterday in my talk as well. Who heard of Container SSH?
First yesterday.
Does yesterday count?
So, but the point I want to make is that it doesn't matter if the project is big or small. Like all the projects are at a different stage, but they all have the same potential. Maybe the use cases are smaller, or maybe you didn't think about all the use cases and you thought, this is just a test project, I'll do it. It's useful for what I'm doing, but who else is interested? You don't know. Just come forward, put it out, listen to what people want to do. This project was created by a couple of people at Red Hat, but it wasn't sponsored by Red Hat. They were doing this in their free time. And we were looking for similar things, and we wanted to do something like this, so we had a call with them, and I was like, why don't you just donate the project? Have you considered this? And they got really excited, like, really? Like the CNCF would take this project? So they did it, and there are a couple of organizations like CERN that were interested. In the meantime, they got different jobs. They don't have time to maintain it anymore, which is fair enough. Like, we are still interested, so we took over. At this moment, we do the majority of the contributions, but our goal is to show the interest, the value of the project, and potentially get more people to collaborate. And this is the process that can take quite a bit of time, and it's trust between the people. It also means that it has to not be owned by a single company, a single organization. This is very important. Sustainability means that this notion of vendor neutrality is very important in the CNCF as well. Now, I just added this slide after I saw Sarah's slide. I love this, so this is not because of this problem, but I thought it was appropriate following Sarah's talk, so I added it here. A couple of years ago, who has heard of KCD, the project? Okay, but a lot of people have never heard. They are using Kubernetes every single day. They are maybe maintaining a lot of applications on top of it, and they've never realized that this project exists. And the reality is that it was there, it was just working. It wasn't relevant, like no one was really making money, but it's actually the core of the whole stack. Without it, the whole thing collapses. And at some point, people realized there's no maintainer left. Who's gonna merge security patches? What's happening here? So, and this is where the foundation really can contribute, because the project became less healthy in this respect, maintainership and being able to actually keep up to date with the problems. So this was raised, and companies and organizations in the CNCF came forward, realized the importance, and just pushed their money where the need was. And they put developers backing the project, and very quickly the project went back to a healthy state. Now it has maintainers that can review PRs, merge things, and this is where sustainability and trust needs to be built so that we can all benefit as end users and also vendors. Now this takes a lot of work, and this is the work I will talk a little bit about the TOC, which is the Technical Oversight Committee in the CNCF. So this is the oversight body for all the projects. Projects come the most common way to come to the foundation is to enter into what we call sandbox. These are low barrier of entry, not a lot of checks being done, but just making sense that there is a potential or some sort of community already behind the project, and that it fits the use case of the cloud native infrastructure, the ecosystem. It is not compulsory. You can go to what we call incubation. And incubation is really where a lot of the work happens and what we call due diligence. And this is doing the checks that will get the project into a more mature state that will ensure sustainability. And this is, I will mention some examples. It's quite an extensive piece of work to do every time, but it's again, building this trust. You know that if the CNCF is saying that this project is in incubation level, as an end user, I have the guarantees of what I can expect from the project. This is really important as well. You can also apply directly to incubation. This is less common. And then from incubation to graduation is where the CNCF says this project is ready to be taken in a sustainable way. You can trust it to build systems that will last 10 years more and critical things. Now, it doesn't mean that the projects are better or worse. There's a lot of projects that at CERN we use that are sandbox, and they work great for us. I will tell you, we use it in production. But I won't tell you, use it yourself, because I don't know if my use case is the same as yours. And also, I cannot give you guarantees over the sustainability of the project long term. It might be that there's only one organization, not enough diversity in maintainership, and this is a risk. But it's a risk that, as an end user, we decided to take. And this is where things are important. When adopting a project, there are certain guarantees that you get if you take a mature project in graduated state that you cannot have in sandbox. So you will have to do a lot of the work yourself internally as an end user. And this is how we work. At CERN, if someone proposes a new project to be added to our stack, we see, the first thing we'll see is like, if it's a CNCF project, where is it? If it's a graduated project, we skip a lot of the internal checks we do otherwise internally. The kind of things that are, I won't go through details, but the kind of things that we are doing is not the most exciting work in open source. It's not as exciting as writing code, I must say, but it is very important. And there are things like, the list of maintainers, is it documented? This is pretty basic, but if you see open source projects that from people that are not necessarily used to build software that will be adopted by a large amount of other users, these are things that are required, but not necessarily the things you think from the start. From the start, you will want to have the code and the cool stuff working, and this usually comes later. So pretty basic things. There's also other ones, like, is there an easy way, an obvious way of how can I submit an issue? If the project has a problem, how do I report this? If you're using GitHub, it's probably like just opening an issue, but is anyone listening behind? Especially for things like security issues. Is there a way to report in a responsible way a CVE, for example? And how is the project structured in a way that it will invite other people to contribute? This is also extremely important. It might be that the project has all the processes to build and checks for security, but if you want to engage other people, are the processes there so that, or documentation so that people know how they can contribute code? And how can they evolve in the project as well? Maybe I've contributed a couple of patches, but now maybe I'm interested in becoming a maintainer and review other people's patches and maybe participate strongly in the roadmap definition. All these things need really the process to be there. So it takes a lot of people to do this work. I list them here. And the reason I put the faces here, the number one is if you have any question, reach out to any of those people. They will be more than happy to follow up. But also, if you realize it's a very diverse set of people. They work in not only different companies, different types of companies. Some of them are vendors, others are end users, and very different domains as well. But we all meet weekly, if not more sometimes, to discuss how the ecosystem can be maintained healthy and help the projects in their journey. Now, how this is structured, and now I will pitch that we need help. Like the people I list here are the ones that are the TOC members, we say, but actually the Technical Oversight Committee has a lot more people contributing to it. All the work that goes behind the scene is done on what's called technical advisory groups. And they used to be structured in these areas like observability, network runtime, kind of traditional isolation in computing. But this is where anyone can contribute. This means it doesn't matter, don't think about what can I do, just think I want to do it, just come forward and join one of the meetings of one of these groups, and they will help you also in your journey contributing to open source communities and helping out. There's very good examples here of people doing a lot of this for many years now. Now we are restructuring these groups. This is why I'm pitching here. We are restructuring in a very different way. So we won't have this traditional, like I'm an expert in storage, so I joined the tag storage. We realize things have changed since the last 10 years when the foundation was created. So we have different ways of like splitting the work, sort of, in these technical advisory groups. You can see maybe you were more focused on developer experience or in infrastructure, which covers storage, network, a lot of things, or maybe in security. So these are the technical advisory groups. And then there's a lot of work that goes into things that are more long-term, like reviewing projects. This is very important. Guarantee the project health, the onboarding of new projects. We need people to review. Maybe you, if you want, you can join, start contributing and writing reports on this sort of thing. And then contribute a strategy, how we defined the process of how projects can improve the way they onboard new people or get more people to participate. This is also very important. And then initiatives which are short-term efforts, time-bound with the well-scoped objectives. Any of this is something that all of you can contribute. So if you need help, ping me, ping any of us, and I will be more than happy to guide you. There's also another body that is called the Technical Advisory Group. I'll kind of skip through this because it's more an end-user focused. I just wanted to mention it because it's something that was supposed to be there from the start, but we only formalized last year. And this is to get a more structured approach to getting end-user feedback back into the foundation. And this is what we will focus on, which is getting better ways for projects to communicate back to the end users and end users to the projects, define reference architectures, maybe this is what, as an end user, I'm looking for, and then seeing where gaps might exist in the ecosystem. I will give you, just to finalize, an example of what I think is a success story of all this process. Back in 2019, we had an issue, which is we were starting to adopt containers and containerization at scale. And at scale at CERN, it usually means like pretty large. And we encounter problems that maybe other environments have not seen or not yet seen. And we organized a workshop which we called container software distribution. And the issue was, and I always ask this, which is how to handle container images when you're deploying a large number of jobs. So I'll ask you, who has used containers? Who has had to deal with a container image that is 10 megabytes size or more? Who has had to deal with one that is 100 megabytes or more? 1 gigabyte or more? 10 gigabytes or more? 2, 3, 4, 100 gigabytes or more? Okay, there's 2 people with their hands raised. I have a lot of questions. But we have images that are, it's not uncommon to have images that are 70 gigabytes. I think our current record is something like 210. I've heard from people when I ask this question of images being 1 terabyte. Now this is very close to insanity, but it's reality. And we had to deal with this. And we could say to people, no, but the best practice is say you have to do layers and everything has to be clean. And we went to our users and they told us, no, there's no way we can restructure the software that includes packages in Fortran built in the 70s. We are not restructuring anything. If it doesn't work, we won't use your new stack. So we tried to solve this on the other sense, but we didn't really know how to do it. So what we did was we organized a workshop at CERN, which covered things like software distribution in containers. But it also covered things like rootless containers, which is also something that is very interesting for us. So you can see here the topics. And we had a really nice group of people. So some CERN people, of course. We had Abdel from Google. He was here just yesterday as well. We had Bob and Jeffrey that are now in the CNCF, but they were in the University of Michigan. Bob was at Google in the meantime, but they are all still around. But actually, we met them more in detail at a CERN event. From NTT, from Japan, we had Akihiro and Kohei flying all the way from Japan. Phil Estes was at IBM, he's now at AWS. So all these people came to help us solve a problem. And this is where we saw, okay, there's something here. We can really trust and build something around this because everyone is here to help us. And this was in, let me check, May 2019. Here's the announcement of a new tool by Kohei in April 2020. So actually he had released this to us, but less than a year after, he released this product that says you can start up containers in lightning speed. It's called lazy pooling, and it's amazing. And we are using this in production since then. And it took almost no time. And really, we thought maybe it's just us that are doing this, but we are not. Like, as you saw, other people keep their hands raised. And even the big players, Google announced just 1 year later that there's something called GKE image streaming, which is basically the same thing. So this is where really the value of the community has very concrete examples of where things can help. And that's basically what I have. I'm more than happy to answer questions or after in the panel. So yeah, thank you.
Two questions, if I can.
Hi, thanks for the talk. I've also been at CERN, working at CERN. It was the best place ever.
This wasn't planned. It wasn't staged, but if you want to come work at CERN, just bring me.
Suppose I wanted to become a full-time open source contributor. Is there any way for me to make a living and pay my bills?
I think if you look back at this slide, this was also what I wanted to show. Like all these companies contributing here, this is open source projects. They're actually making a lot of money. Like these are big companies, but there's much smaller companies. This is their business model, is to rely on open source projects. And they do this fully upstream. I don't know, like we have people from Ericsson here. We were just talking to them this morning. They have a team that has decided that it's upstream first. Everything they do is done on open source first. And these are their jobs. Like my job is also, I spend a lot of time in the CNCF. I write code that goes upstream as well. This is my job. I'm not doing this in the evening outside working hours. My employer has realized that this is strategic for what we do and has dedicated people time to this. Exactly, it's like Lucas is working outbound, it's exactly the same. They maintain a tool called Crossplane, which is upstream first. They donated the project is very successful. There's other companies also relying on it and even building products around it. But all of them collaborate because they know this is their business. They have to do it in the open. So it's not the open source, it's what Sarah was also mentioning, open source is not free, as in the sense of
Just getting it.
taking it for free. It has to be nurtured, it has to be made sustainable, but also it has to be sustainable means that someone has to be making a living out of it. Otherwise, people will just move somewhere else. And this is reality. Like this open source model and the business model behind open source is successful. And these are very good examples of where this is successful.
Okay, so basically I need a rich company to back me up.
Well, if you want to start, what I would suggest, the best way, I think, or one possible way, one is to go to companies that have this principle by default, and there's many. You can search for them back in these projects. The other one is to help us. So if you come here and you join one of these initiatives, you will be known in the community, and you won't have to look for a job. People will actually come and get you. And this is what has happened to many people. I will point again to Lucas, which is he started doing things on his own, and then suddenly, like, these companies were actually asking him to come and work for them. So joining the community is a very welcoming community, is a very good first step.
That's actually a very good point, because I think that my value in the job market is rather low, because I've always worked in closed source project. So I don't have an impressive portfolio that I can share.
Exactly, and this is also one of the advantages of these communities that, and especially, okay, I work at CERN, so we are very open about everything we do. I'm not going to say that other companies are this open, but if you're doing open source work, it means you will go to conferences like KubeCon with 12,000 people, and you will present this to everyone. And this is, it's also building your CV. Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. One more question.
A question a bit about work with open source when you're already in the company. So how would you argue for an employer or organization that you're in the value proposition of participating in open source, so that you don't have to end up in a lot of places where they use a lot of tools, but we want to make them contribute back?
I didn't quite hear.
How do you make the case inside the company?
Yeah, but you organize.
All right, then you go to my backup slides. I did prepare some answers. This wasn't staged, huh? I'm serious. So, this is what I will give you. What works for me? What worked for me as a CERN, and from what I hear other people. That you will get very different answers if you ask other people. So how do we persuade the company to see the value of open source and help you do this? Now, one thing works really well, which is bring your managers to a CNCF event. The perception of open source is in many organizations totally wrong. It's like, it's open source, it's kind of a tool that someone is maintaining in their spare time. Bring them to KubeCon, see them walking around with 12,000 people, go to the sponsor hall and the booths, and see how much money is involved in all of this. And they will change their mind very, very quickly. This works really, really well. And this is a big problem. I do have more, which is invite other end users to internal events in your company. We do this a lot. As CERN, I go to events in other companies where I explain our journey, And I explained the value we are getting from using open source and being part of communities like the CNCF and joining the foundations. It's something that I write here. Sometimes you say this 100 times internally and no one listens. Then you invite someone from outside and they will say the exact same thing, and suddenly it becomes an enlightenment thing and everyone agrees. This works terribly well. It's sad, but it's just like this. So it's better just to accept it and do it than try to do differently. This works. I do this all the time internally. And I have one more, which is internally, once you started the process, make sure you highlight all the successes. Like what I'm mentioning here about this container software workshop. This is something that I will repeat insanely. I don't care how many times I have to repeat internally, as a good example of what we are getting. Like this is something that we would never have been able to tackle by ourselves. We got the community involved, everyone saw interest on it, and we got it from the community. We contributed to giving feedback and supporting the developers, and it's now serving hundreds of thousands of workloads in production at CERN. So all of this are ways to do it. There are others, but I would recommend at least these three.
I think we need to, let's take it, let's have a break, and then you can ask it from him in the break. Yes.
Or in the panel.
Or the panel, yes.
There's lots of
You save some of your questions as well for the panel. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you.
Then let's continue with our third of 4 talks. Again, we're so happy to have so many excellent speakers today sharing a variety of topics in this space. And this one is fun as well. We, as kind of organizing the Kubernetes Community Days event, we want to kind of get lots of different people together, and then Gergely, the chairperson of Cloud Native Finland, and who's also working at Nokia, of course has also the organizer of the open source office, program office meetup in Helsinki. Was like, yeah, where there's all of these kind of new regulations in the EU, lots of things to think about. Of course, Nokia and Ericsson and all of these are very interested in them. And people are trying to figure out what's going on. Let's bring someone here from the Linux Foundation who has a lot of knowledge on this, in this space for this as well. So we're super happy to have Ricardo here. And then I was just talking to him, and I learned that he's also running one of the open source courses in which university was it? Berlin?
The Technical University of Berlin.
Technical University of Berlin, yeah. So we'll see if we can, do some collaborations there as well to kind of get this even more kind of into the ecosystem here. But yes, super happy to have you here, and welcome to Startup Summit. Yes.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm also super happy to be here. I always like to be where the sausages are made, basically, the crowds of people who have startups and ideas and want to build things, so super happy. Now, you heard 2 really amazing presentations, and the next one will be different. Because I'm going to talk about, at least partially, the most unexciting topic in the world, tech policy. Right. So, but before we jump in, right? So, who are we? I work for the Linux Foundation. In particular, I work at the Linux Foundation Europe. We're the European chapter of the Linux Foundation. And what I was asked today, which kind of surprised me because I thought everybody knows the Linux Foundation, but maybe not. So the CNCF, for example, is a project, a foundation under the Linux Foundation. The Linux kernel is a project under the Linux Foundation, and about 1,000 projects more that you have probably heard of, like Jupyter and PyTorch and many others. So these are the projects that we support, and we basically do 3 things. We, unfortunately that didn't work for me, so don't worry. Never mind, thank you. We help the project portfolio of the Linux Foundation kind of gain a bigger foothold in Europe by getting you involved. We are trying to getting you involved into the projects. And we also represent the Linux Foundation in things like policy making. I go to Brussels a lot. I was asked that too today. So that's basically the background of my day-to-day work. And my personal background is I've actually been a software developer in open source projects since 1997. I did come to Finland in the past to teach C++ programming to people here. So, but my training is actually innovation economics. And that's also what I'm teaching in Berlin. So we actually do have a course on open source and intellectual property, where we do discuss things like business models and licensing and compliance and other things. So yes, it is taught at university, not that many. And many other things. I live close to Berlin in Germany. So, so you saw the title of the presentation, and you may have wondered, like, what does he mean, European context in cloud native computing? And I think this is really a subject that requires explanation. Have you heard of the term digital sovereignty? Okay, so, yeah. Now, the interesting thing is that it means different things to different people. So on the left, all right, you see the European understanding. We want to have the capacity to decide ourselves what technology we want to use, want to contribute to that technology, and drive digital infrastructure and technology development. On the right side, you see a slightly different vision of digital sovereignty, which is It is the capability of a country to control the internet in its own territory. Now, we're here in the European Union member state, so the left definition is the one that applies to us. But you can see a certain tension in that when you ask, say, policymakers in maybe in Helsinki, but also in Berlin and Paris and Amsterdam, what do you think about the fact that you can't get away from big cloud providers or from online collaboration tools and where there are no European alternatives? And they get quite itchy. And as you may also have noticed that recently the international security environment didn't actually get much better. In the last years it has really deteriorated, and that means that this aspect of we need to actually critically think about what technologies we deploy in our own digital infrastructure, and do they actually give us digital sovereignty? And so that's happening. Here's another example. Interoperability. Interoperability in the European context is mostly seen as a way to drive competition. So it's related to the digital sovereignty aspect that I mentioned before. It is, if we have interoperability, then we can basically switch between cloud providers, between service providers, because their services are interchangeable. Now, we all know that this hasn't really happened at the application layer, but you know where it did happen? In cloud computing, in cloud native computing in particular. So on the right side, you see a screenshot. This is a presentation that we gave at the, I didn't explain the alphabet soup at the top. The European Commission's multi-stakeholder platform for ICT standardizations task force for the rolling plan. Yeah, so the, did I not say ICT?
You said ICT, but you said ICT.
Information and Communication Technologies.
Okay.
So European Commission multi-stakeholder platform for information and communication technologies standardization is missing, but, and especially there the task force for the rolling plan. And this rolling plan is a document that is collaboratively authored by people in this group and is submitted to the European Commission and basically sets the roadmap for technical standardization for the next 3 years. And this group is appointed by a commissioner, a director general at the European Commission. And I can say proudly that I am one of, actually the first open source foundation representative in this group. Until now, we had standards developers, member state representatives, company representatives, but no open source foundation. So this is new. And you can see kind of what we submitted there. We basically said, cloud interoperability is technically a solved problem today. If you want to look it up a little bit, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation publishes a survey every year. It's a website that shows to what extent the technologies that you heard about earlier have permeated the market. And it's amazing. It's basically like every cloud provider drives more or less the same stack. So what we presented there to the European Commission representatives was to say, actually, we don't need to use standardization to achieve interoperability in the cloud. We need regulation to break up incumbent positions. So yeah, second aspect. So the first one was digital sovereignty. This one is how do we create or foster, re-enable competition in our internal market. And now, as a result, in a way, so you see there are people in Brussels, people in the member states, and they come to meetings and they say, oh, this is not a great situation, we need to do something about this. What do policymakers do if they want to do something about something? Policy and?
Money.
Regulation and?
Money.
That was my point, thank you. So have you heard of IPSI-CIS?
Actually, yes.
Yeah, okay, so IPSI-CIS is this one I actually have to read. Important project of common European interest, next generation cloud infrastructure and services. Yeah, I couldn't memorize that.
But somehow Finland is not part of it. So.
I think, I'm not so sure, but I'm surprised, but yeah. No, actually Finland is not part of it because it is a commitment, as you see in the second bullet, of the member states. So what has happened here is that we have proper competition regulation and antitrust regulation in the European Union. You know that, right? And that means member states cannot just go in and pick their favorites and say, I will sponsor you a little bit, worth $1 billion here and $1 billion there, to build up my national champion. Right? You can't do that. The European Commission's, the European Union's competition watchdog will come and shut this down. Except if we have primarily, prior, identified an important project of common European interest, where then the European Parliament decides that, oh, this is such an important topic that we allow the member states to suspend antitrust regulation. And it's not infinite, it's capped. In this case, it's 1.2 billion euros. And the member states that offered to participate in that are France, Germany, Hungary, Italy, the Netherlands, Poland, and Spain. And Finland is not on it because you would have to join it. But it's not exclusive in a way. What this really means is that the member states can go, take some money, up to in total 1.2 billion, and pour it in their local IT industry to develop cloud infrastructure that can provide better digital sovereignty. So this project runs since 2 years, I think. There's also the assumption that this is like a 1.2 billion euro investment by the public, and it raises 1.4 billion euros in private co-investment. So that's pretty normal. The companies would also invest themselves. So by giving this stimulus, you're basically encouraging other economic activity, and therefore you get to this like bigger number, if it works. It works actually pretty well. Now here's an interesting bit, and that is participants will grant permissive, non-restrictive open source software licenses and actively build open source communities with the results. Does anybody see a problem so far? Okay, so overall, it sounds actually not so bad, right? So we're saying, okay, the European Union coordinates that, the member states are investing money in the local IT industry, and the local IT industry develops open source software and builds communities around this. So far, so good. What are the concerns you would have? You nodded, so.
Well, I mean, how do you get return on investment for those the companies that invest?
Yeah, so very good. So how do you actually benefit as the public from this? Because we're spending taxpayers' money. Now, there's another concern here. You know, I'm standing here as a representative of the largest open source collaboration in the world. What's the concern that I would have? What do you think? Are we going to have two separate cloud-native computing stacks? Are we developing one in Europe, separate from the one that is developed collaboratively globally at the Cloud Native Computing Foundation?
And also, how do you trust the people that are getting that money?
And I'm not even getting to trust. So basically, our biggest concern when we saw this was fragmentation. We basically said, nothing helps us, our ecosystem, our companies, if we are creating two solutions that are not each as good as one that we develop together. This is probably what would have happened. So, as the Linux Foundation, we had a very strong interest here to provide at least an influence and incentive for the outcomes of this funding that are open source to kind of merge with the wider open source ecosystem. And that's what I would like to show you now. So basically, we're trying to bridge these two camps. And you mentioned trust. The mandate that the results have to be published under permissive open source licenses is unfortunately slightly blurry, because it describes certain functionality, and this should be under open source licenses, but there's more activity in the project. And guess what? The companies that are getting the funding are not releasing the other parts under open source licenses. So we're already seeing this kind of like development of basically two tech stacks that are roughly doing the same thing, but not exactly. And one is open source, and one is controlled by big players who formally make some parts open source, but are not really interested in like building a community around this, because that would mean losing control. So what do we do? What's the role of an open source foundation? We capture open source development and build an open source and openly governed project around this. And we encourage the companies that are getting the funding, some of them are actually quite willing to do that, to take what they develop and host it under a foundation and neutral governance. And that's what just happened. So we launched the NeoNephos Foundation, which is a a European-hosted open source foundation that develops technologies that are actually quite related to what the Cloud Native Computing Foundation develops. So related, as you will see later, this project was announced in Chris's keynote at KubeCon, in the first 10 minutes of KubeCon. So we built a very close relationship here. And as I said, our goal here is to say, let's make sure that these two, ecosystems is maybe the wrong word, these two collaborations, the one at the CNCF and the one at this publicly funded project, that they're converging and that the results are integrated into one coherent tech stack. What is NeoNephos? It is a foundation that we host in Europe, or maybe I didn't mention that. So Linux Foundation Europe has its headquarters in Brussels, and that means that we can host projects that are legally headquartered in the European Union. And this is one of them. And basically, the IPSI CIS project has a deliverable, which is a reference architecture for cloud edge computing. Quite actually a challenging and ambitious project. And this one is supposed to be open source, and this reference architecture has mostly been developed by SAP and Deutsche Telekom, and has been donated to this project under an open source license. So we now have, probably from my perspective, the biggest deliverables that are coming out of this public investment hosted in an open source foundation since early April, so 1 month now. Like it's not, this is all like brand new news. So what does NeoNephos do? It is it's a foundation under Linux Foundation Europe. Foundation means it hosts multiple projects. So we have an umbrella structure where you have the global Linux Foundation, and the Linux Foundation hosts projects in other foundations, and the CNCF is one of them. And then foundations host projects. So it's kind of a huge hierarchy. So we host the technology that the NeoNephos Foundation develops, and that includes frameworks for interoperability, the actual platform. There's a reference platform for this cloud edge computing in there, and infrastructure. There's even hardware when we're not sure, because this was hosted by the businesses so far, and the question is, how do we migrate the reference environments, etc., to the foundation? So what does this foundation stand for? This, by the way, this wording hasn't been written by me. This is written by the new governing board for this organization, where the chair of the governing board is a colleague from SAP. So this is kind of a vision that our industry members have written and said, we would like to make sure that if we develop something in Europe, it actually becomes part of the open source ecosystem. So they highlight open governance without vendor bias, meaning it's a typical open source foundation. Every interested party can participate. The collaboration focuses on digital sovereignty, and there is the stewardship of the project is driven by the community. Now, this sounds a little bit idealistic. What we are seeing here is a bit of a tension, because the companies aren't free to decide what they want to develop under this funding program. Of course, they have deliverables, things that they need to do in a certain timeline. So one thing that we have to make sure is that as they develop their deliverables, that they can contribute that to the project, that the roadmap of the project does not contradict what the publicly funded project produces. So this is a photo of the keynote stage. You see Chris there and Vasu right there as well. And this is the KubeCon stage, and imagine this room. I had to basically walk this path there back 100 meters to take this picture, because the stage was so big. Like this, we had 13,000 people in London at KubeCon. And this is the announcement that we made. So we'll go through a bit more details here. These are the member companies that are participating in this from the start. Stackit is a bit of like a undercover champion, digital champion in Germany. Belongs to Schwarz Group, and that's a part of one of the biggest retailers in Europe. And they're running their data centers, like the retailers in the US. And as such, they become huge cloud providers. And SAP and Telecom, you probably heard of them. T-Systems is the IT arm of Telecom. And then smaller companies and the applied research organization of the Netherlands, TNO. So
I think you can probably say what retail is Stackit, like the legal, to make it more concrete. Or is Ricardo.
Yeah, I could.
Yeah.
This is what a project like this looks like. You've seen something similar in Ricardo's talk, like the governance structure of a typical foundation. We have a governing board. The role of the governing board is to basically decide on the spending of the funding of the project. All our Linux Foundation projects are non-profit in themselves. We have no cross-financing. So the companies that you've seen, they pay a membership fee. This all goes into one pot, and that becomes the budget of the foundation. And then the governing board decides how this budget is spent. So they just decided to get like email services, and they decide to get GitHub Enterprise for this, and etc., things like that. And a small percentage, 7%, goes at administrative overhead to us, and that pays for things like our events team that organizes the event, or we run the legal team for all the projects, etc. So the governing board decides on how the budget of the foundation is spent. Then you have a technical advisory committee, which is the aggregate of the technical representatives of the different projects in the organization. And our technical governance in the projects is meritocratic, meaning you can contribute to any project. You don't need to be a member or a paying member in any of our organizations. You can participate in a regular, normal open source process and become visible as a contributor, and then people will pull you in and make you a maintainer. And if you're still successful, they might pull you in and make you a technical steering committee member for this project. And if you're still successful, they may actually send you as the representative of this project to the Technical Advisory Council. That's the group up there. And the projects are as what you would expect, like GitHub repositories. They have projects, they have contributors, they have maintainers, and each project has a technical steering committee, and they form the advisory council. And all of that is governed by a charter. And it might also be interesting that if you go to our project's websites, you will find the charters. You'll find the technical charters, you'll find the charters of the governing board, you'll find the membership fees. All of that is transparent, and we also list the companies that are members in the projects. We call this open governance. Basically, we say all these processes of how our projects decide to spend money, what is the roadmap of the project, etc., should be transparent. And this is an overview of the projects that have been added to this new foundation. If you have been working in this space, then Gardener and Garden Linux may actually be something you've heard of. It's a tool for managing Kubernetes clusters that SAP has developed. It's open source for a long time, but SAP realized that nobody actually contributes to your project if it's owned by your company. Like, nobody contributes to their competitor's product. So they said, to make this really successful as an open source collaboration, we need to move the project under neutral governance, us, so that others, like our competitors, can work with us on this project as equals. And that's what they did. This is actually a really valuable project that is in production for longer than 5 years. So this is not new. And the others that are kind of outcomes of the IPSI project, and Cobalt Core and Iron Core are basically fabrics. One targets virtual machine-based provisioning and one bare metal provisioning for this Kubernetes stack, the reference architecture that this project develops. So basically there is already, because these projects were donated, kind of the starting point for this new foundation. And this is the value of European Union taxpayer money. Right? It's all open source now and openly governed. Now I said that our goal, or one of our key goals, was to kind of make sure that the ecosystems converge and stay together. These are the Cloud Native Computing Foundation projects that the NeoNephos Foundation is consuming and integrating. And as you see, basically this looks like all the names that you've heard before. So this is a stack that is very compatible, very similar to what is developed at the CNCF, which shows in a way that this goal of making sure that these ecosystems converge is actually achieved. That's it. Basically, there are some links here. We had the KubeCon keynote. We had a lot of press coverage when we started the project. And yeah, lots of public money at work. So thank you. This is what I wanted to show you, and I'm happy to take some questions.
point that I'd like to hear a bit about is where do you see going from all these great projects to somebody funding a whole lot of method running somewhere for someone to actually buy into and have this cloud infrastructure that might be like a shared resource, like from the big cloud provider? Or is this more enabling enterprises to build a cloud for themselves? Like is the multi-tenancy part that scale that you've seen from international cloud providers outside of Europe, how do you see this project like maybe become that, or is that not finished?
I'm not sure if I got the question right. I understood that you were asking if people are actually deploying this.
No,
Okay.
for this to become an alternative to the big three cloud providers and others, it needs a lot of metal to actually run somewhere so people can buy into it. And it's that transitioning from all of these great projects that is in use in, as we know, a lot of enterprises, to someone buying into, say, we're going to buy 10 data centers around the world and build all of them and let people rent into it. Where do you see that? What's the difference between this project and all the Hesnas and the UpCloud and the OWPH? Like where do you just draw the distinction? See what this is from what it now can become and what it is now?
Yeah. So first, this project adds functionality that doesn't exist before. Two key parts. One is edge computing integrated into the cluster. The other one is actually offline computing. So there's a use case for this where it works in a submarine. And this whole integration stack with running on bare metal, etc., closes some gaps there that weren't there before. The other aspect, I kind of talked about development here, and we always have to make a very clear distinction between development and operations. Like the question is, will anybody take this and run data centers with it? The benefit that I see is that SAP is actually already running their data centers with that. So this is the stack that SAP is running. This is the stack that T-Systems is migrating to. And we are working with other companies, including plane makers and things like that, to join this project to also take it. Nobody knows what the future brings. Like, I can't promise that people will adopt this. But it's a question of opportunity and options as well. If you have the option to deploy something in a European context, when the need for that is there, then that option may materialize itself. So I'm happy that we have this project and we cover mostly the development part. We cover no operations. I probably should add that too. We don't operate the data center. We only host the development activities. And now it's up to the companies to make something that, as one of our policy influencers has put it, services that European consumers would really want to buy. Right? And this is probably the challenge on top, both in terms of quality and price. Take this and run it in a way that people flock to you. And that's the next challenge.
Cool. Thank you very much. Okay, so next up we're going to have Anni Kalvasta. Myself and Anni have been running the Kubernetes meetups here in Finland since 7.5 years. Now, so it's really cool and then, yeah, it's been a great experience, meeting this group like every second month or so. And now, also with the other team, Kente and more, we've been running the conference yesterday. Before this was was part of Aaltoes, doing lots of stuff here in the earlier days, and is now then going to talk about these different things, how to get started, how to contribute in practical examples, and let's see, maybe you will also demo as well, which is fun. So yeah, no, this is going to be a really great one, and then we're going to jump into after this. Okay, perfect.
Thanks for spending as much time as possible. I think we had a brief chat there with Lucas, and we decided that it's been a bit of a long evening already, so maybe we skip the break and let's just move on straight to my session. And I'll also try to keep it relatively short and whatnot, because we've heard a lot of good things already today, so that we can move on to the panel that we've been advertising the whole day So, let's move forward. Oh, now it's going everywhere. Oh, there's spoilers. There we go. Oh, this is forward and this back. Okay. We used a completely different finger yesterday, so obviously I got confused. Okay, so you saw some spoilers, but that's all right, because you're just on the edge. You know, you're excited to hear all the stuff that you saw. So yeah, anyhow, opening doors. So essentially, I was asked by Lucas here and kind of like everyone here who's organizing this to do a bit on my story on how I've gone from an actual Aaltoes team member and an Aalto student to become a open source contributor and doing all this work that Lucas mentioned in the beginning as well and everything. So that's going to be part one of this talk, and then part two will be how to contribute. Now, Ricardo did a great job of kind of covering some of those topics already, and obviously Sarah as well, and everyone has been kind of talking about these things, but I'm maybe going to give some examples on concretely how to get started, as concrete as one can get, maybe, hopefully. Let's see. But obviously, if you have any questions about that, we can obviously discuss more in the panel as well then.
I forgot to say that you're also a CNCF ambassador. You flew in from New York to have this event and all these kind of things.
Exactly. So I am from Finland, but I live in New York right now. So it's really lovely to be here in my home country and an ex-Aalto student as well in my home university, I guess. So that's cool. But yeah, a tiny bit about me. Lucas already mentioned a lot of the stuff. Yes, I run a company called Vevo in New York. I'm a CNCF ambassador as well as an Azure and AI platform VP. And what those two essentially mean is that I just really like tech communities. I love contributing to them. I love doing these kind of events and sharing my knowledge about these topics. And then I'm also been doing Cloud Gossip podcast and different shows and content. And I've been doing, I hosted Club Native Live, which is a CNCF weekly live stream for a couple of years, and a host of other things, which I maybe talk more in the next slide. But a lot of things, a lot of contributions and whatnot, which is exactly why I'm here today talking to you about these topics. So let's get to this slide, which was, I guess, up a bit more, and I saw people being like, huh, what's that about? Well, this is the my career or my contributor story slide, where I have the three different kind of like phases to my story in this phase. So essentially we have, we're trying to find some type of icon for like startups, like a lot of startup focused work, and I think rocket ship felt kind of adequate, maybe. I think, you know, I'm seeing some nodding and maybe people are agreeing. So I started in Aaltoes in 2012, which was just like 2 months after Mickey Kuusi was aboard, like president of Aaltoes. So this was back when Slash was still about like 1,000 people, relatively tiny, and I worked with Aaltoes up until 2016, 2015, you know, you show that kind of stuff. Yeah, and it was actually really lovely to come here, and I was like, oh, I wonder if I'm going to see any people who I remember back from those days, and immediately Mike was here, and I was like, lovely, perfect, the same faces I feel sometimes here, so it's always lovely to see friendly faces. But a lot of fun stories could be shared from that time, but I don't want to get too into it because I'll feel like an old geezer very, very fast. But I can say that it was really fun to see all of these that Aaltoes is doing this year. And it's also fun to see how all of these things kind of cycle through constantly. I used to organize events like Build It, we called Build It, but they were very different back then. Mike is organizing with Aaltoes tomorrow, Pitch It. I used to organize that as well, different as well. So fun to see that there's, you know, movement happening. And I was also lucky to see and happy to see all the chairs here, because I think these are the exact same chairs that I've been carrying in Aaltoes 10 years ago. So very familiar with these chairs, a lot of chairs carrying for sure. But that's kind of what I was doing then. And then I got recruited from all of these kind of startup activities to run a co-working space for Microsoft. A startup co-working space specifically with coaching and all of these kind of things, and I think this makes the transition. Startups are already techie, and I had kind of like a bit of coding background a bit before that. But after that, I started working for Microsoft, and after that for other tech companies, the transition from startups and startup ecosystem to actual, you know, infrastructure technology starts to make kind of a lot of sense. And that is exactly where I met Lucas then, for example, and we started the CNCF and Kubernetes meetup in Finland. And this is where obviously my contributions to the open source and specifically cloud native and CNCF ecosystem kick off quite a bit, as you can imagine. We talked a lot about different projects and all the different things today, but I do then see that I kind of start learning more, contributing more, and really diving deeper into the topics and really understanding the communities and giving back to them as well. And then I see kind of from 2021 forward, that's when I started really doing a lot of stuff. And you can see kind of in life, there's always these moments where you usually work hard, so you kind of, you know, plant seeds and you grow them, and then eventually they're going to start, you know, kind of, it's time for harvest. So I see that after you work hard with these kind of topics for a while, you'll start seeing the fruit of your labor kind of come in. And I feel like eventually these things, particularly here, everyone's kind of been asking, oh, how does the, like, can you make a living? What does open source contributions lead to and whatnot? So I can say that from my side at least, there is a lot of things and benefits that it leads to. Well, we mentioned today already that, you know, people have found jobs from these communities, and the same goes for me and a lot of other people. And for me, I'm also happy that I've been able to talk at 5 different tech conferences in 5 different continents, over 60 events. So it's been really great to share these topics with everyone, and also it's been a really great way for me to learn, obviously, as well, because the best way to learn is by teaching as well. So there's a lot of good things there. But I think the biggest part about it all, what it kind of all boils down to, is that it is you can help to shape, there's a typo, but that's okay, help to shape the conversations that influence global tech communities. So I think with all of these events, with all of these contributions, it's really great to see that your work has an impact to a lot of people globally, and that impact can happen by projects growing, and you see them grow and being adapted, and people actually getting a lot of benefits from them, and that contributions can be either code contributions or non-code contributions. So it's really great, and that impact is surely going to be around for a long time as well. Now, it is not just me, there's a lot of people doing this, and that means that there's a lot of different stories from people who have contributed a lot to open source. And now, if you are looking for those stories and feeling like, oh, is there someone who could maybe be someone's story that I could take inspiration to, you can always hop on to the Humans and Cloud Native area in CNCF area. That's specifically like cloud native contributor stories. You can see here a couple of them. So everything from all these people doing blogging and podcasting, communication, championing different community groups, and then also a GitOps maintainer and whatnot that's come up a bit as well, and so forth. A bit more about that later. But I think we've heard about CNCF and landscape and projects a lot. Some people might have seen this. Who hasn't seen this before? Okay, there's one person, that's cool. But a lot of people have seen it. And this is the one of the funniest images because it is massive nowadays. It's the CNCF landscape and also this is just 1/3 of it nowadays. And I was surprised I was trying to fit it into 1 slide or 2, and I was like, no, it takes 3 slides nowadays. So it's definitely a lot to take in and a lot to understand, like where can you fit into the ecosystem and where could your voice and where could your contributions be heard. So I think it's important to then just kind of zoom in a bit and see what's happening there a bit closer. So if we zoom in, for example, there, we see that in the scheduling and orchestration area, we have different projects there, and now it starts to feel a lot more approachable when we actually zoom into the document, because that big thing, it's too much. Like, no one's gonna be able to be like, oh, I wanna do that or that or that from there. So if we start zooming in, we can see, oh, this is an area that I could be interested in, and then you can see, oh, there's a project called KCD, for example, that you might be thinking, oh, I wanna contribute maybe there, that could be interesting. And as an example of what kind of these projects look like, how many here has heard about KCD before? Okay, a couple people, good. And we did hear about Argo and whatnot before, but if you are now wondering, like, what are these projects? How do they look like? How do they feel like? Why are people contributing? What are they contributing to? An example of KCD, so it's Kubernetes event-driven auto-scaling. It's a graduator project within CNCF. Part of, like Ricardo told you, all the different stages that the projects go through, so graduated, so very mature there. So what is it? So default Kubernetes scaling is not really well suited for event-driven applications, so KDA helps with that by providing event-driven scale controlling that can run inside any Kubernetes cluster and preemptively then act to downscale or upscale. Now, to actually show you rather than just talk and tell, use actual examples rather than just images here and there and words. I have a quick demo. Yeah, I know. I've been thinking about it the whole time, and I've been sitting there like, do I want to do this live demo? But I decided that I want to live on the edge and dangerously and actually try to do it. And it's gonna be a first. Yeah, well, no, it's fine. It's gonna be a first for me as well, doing a demo while kind of huddled over here. It's a super quick one, so it's fine. I need to do just a couple things. Okay, so it's gonna be a super simple demo. So scaling.NET Core working with Azure Service Bus. So you can see here order caller, order processor, orders coming in, order generator. So essentially, it will be, you can imagine a web shop gets a bunch of orders at the same time. You need to really scale up your demand, and then you scale down as well because you don't want to spend compute, you don't want to spend cost that's not needed. So let's see how it actually looks like in practice. So then I have things a bit set up here. This screen was obviously much bigger than my own, so let's just make things a bit better maybe. There we go. Hopefully it's kind of visible. Yeah, well, I figured because the screen is absolutely massive, so you should be able to see some things at least. Okay. This is going to be tricky. So we do kubectl get services. So there we see the external IP, and this is probably the hardest part. Then we go here, and then we get actual visibility into the order portal when it loads. And there we can then start getting more visibility into other parts. So we can get go here, get visibility there, do kubectl get deployments there. Can't even see if it's working, but it should be. And then there, so then we see we have order processors, how many of them are ready, and then we see orders, how many, what's the status of them, so that we can see are they being generated or not. And then we can do the actual fun part of the demo. So we do .NET Run, and then it's going to ask, let's queue some orders. How many do you want? And this is when I turn to you. So how many orders do we want to queue up? How many orders will our web shop receive? So can I give a number? Can I get a number between 100 and 150? Anyone? 149, did you say? Perfect. That is a good number. 149. There we go. It's going to get a little fast. So we see queuing orders. Cheese, sausage, soap, chips, bites, bacon, keyboard, all of them coming in. And then we see the order queue going up. We can see order word processors starting to get ready. We can see them pending and they're created. So it is all orders going up. So it is nicely kind of going. We can see tuna, mouse, shirt, cheese, so many things. We are at 4 out of 4 order processors. And as you can see, the order queue is about to hit the maximum there. Well, not the maximum, the 194 that we asked for. And now when we see the orders are starting to get handled as well, we see the order queue starting to decrease. Because as you can see, we moved on from actually creating new resources to actually just running them and going through all those orders. And as we can see, we are at 8 out of 8, and now 8 out of 10. So 10 out of 10 order processors. So we have auto scale successfully there, which is usually, this is where it ends up, 10 out of 10. And we're handling them, as you can see, we are nearing 0 there. We are handling that order queue nicely, perfectly. Things went smoothly, which I'm very happy about, because demos, they can always go wrong. But that's nice. And obviously, super important is going to be actually the downscaling as well, which should be happening. I'll give you a spoiler in about a couple minutes, so we're not going to sit here staring at this screen for a couple minutes only. But if I remember, I can show it to you like when it starts terminating things. But honestly, it's not as flashy or cool. They just go down. It's all good. It's a simple demo in that sense. So this is kind of the exciting part for sure. But that's it. that was all the exercise that I got needed from moving around here and squatting, and then we are done with that. So that is an example of a project in CNCF. So you can see this is how the projects look like, these are what they do, this is how the stuff that you could be contributing to, for example. Now, obviously these things don't happen out of nowhere, as we've talked by a lot of the speakers today. All of these open source projects need contributors, they need people running these, they need people even writing these kind of blog posts, you know, that these are actually a sandbox project, graduated project and whatnot, so there's a lot of things that are needed to be done. And these are not faceless projects, these are not projects, you know, maintained by some people somewhere. There is actually, you can go in and check who are the people behind it, so you can check here who are the CADA maintainers, for example, and even the alumni maintainers. And I think this, for me at least, is somehow usually quite helpful if I'm wondering, oh, is this project interesting or whatnot? Just to remind yourself there's people behind it. And if you go into the project and you say, hey, I want to help, there's probably going to be a Jeff, a Jan, or someone else who's going to see your request, probably going to be super appreciative, be happy that they are getting someone in new to the project. So, you know, that's something that you can think about. That if you were swamped with a lot of work and someone came in and said, hey, I want to help out, I think you would probably be happy. So probably most of the maintainers will be happy as well if you pump in and you say, I want to help. And in addition to maintainers, as everyone's already mentioned, there's so many different roles that you can take, so many different levels of involvement. Like you don't have to go full-time maintainer, trying to make a living immediately of things. You can obviously make that maybe a long-term goal at some point, or you can, you know, start from different things, and even you don't need to do this, you know, official or anything, but there's so many different roles that you can do and find your spot in contributing to the cloud native ecosystem or open source as a whole. There's obviously a bunch of other foundations under Linux Foundation umbrella, as well as anything else that you can hump it. And again, kind of so many stories that you can run through just from cloud native humans alone, but there's probably so many different blog posts, content to find like your inspiration on someone who's done maybe something who has a similar story to you that you can find, or something else. And there's also a handy dandy page where you can just, you know, start your journey as well, so you can contribute. This is the CNCF contributors page. So if you're completely stumped, you can go there. And also a good tip that I heard is that if you are completely stumped on what to do, how to start contributing, there's also a way to start contributing to contributor experience. So if you feel that you are not finding a resource how to start contributing, maybe the first time that you contribute is a new resource on how to find a place to contribute. So really the kind of sky is the limit when you can think about these things. Now, if we're thinking about startup contributions, like if you have a company or if you're interested in something like that, there's obviously a lot of resources around that. And if you are thinking about these things, there's really good couple of videos in YouTube from the Cloud Native Startup Fest, from the North American one and the EU one. So if you have been thinking about building an open source startup, have an open source startup, just interested in the topic, these two playlists in YouTube, super, super handy. They have really good topics from just as, you know, licensing issues, panels from VCs on talking about what does open source startups, what type of startups they look for, how to raise funding as an open source startups, all of these topics and success stories and all of these kind of things. Really worthwhile you'll listen and watching these if you're interested in these topics, and maybe you can obviously ask about them in the panel as well. A good example of that is, for example, there's a isovalent case study there in part of that videos, which is a good example of an open source startup who's been very successful in making good amount of revenue and money alone, and then being acquired by Cisco. So kind of completing that startup life cycle in some ways, which is obviously kind of what everyone sets out to do in some ways when they start a startup. Not the acquisition part necessarily, but, you know, finding some type of end goal and finishing that journey for you, whether that be an exit, acquisition, or IPO or something like that. A really good example of that. And they had a really good example there of how you can see in a essentially linear graph the GitHub stars that they have and that the revenue they were building for the company go hand in hand up. So you can really see like how the open source contributions and open source work led to really good business outcomes as well. I will put all of my links and slides to my GitHub as I usually do, and then I have just the links there as well. A lot of people took pictures of them already, so it's good. But that's it from my side. I guess we now move to the panel. Maybe we have a break. Lucas is up next. Thanks so much.
Do you want to take it? One question? Yes, is everything okay with the last week? Positive. So, yeah, so as I said before, super happy that all of you, when registering, provided very thoughtful questions or answers to the question of what do you want to learn at this event. And here in my notebook, I'm a physical notebook guide. I wrote down some of the pre-submitted questions, and we'll go through some of them first, and then we'll open it up to further Q&A from more questions. So the first one is where we're going to continue where we left off in one of the other questions live today here, and that's how do you actually find a job with these things? How do you get actually, you know, like from the stage of being interested in a project to contributing to getting a job and sustaining yourself financially and through a salary, which is nice, of course. Well, for me that happened, and it was a nice thing, but Sarah had some more answers to that question. Oops. Yes.
I was trying really hard not to jump in as Ricardo was talking, because I have ideas too. But there were two main points that I was going to make. One is that a lot of companies that depend on these projects are now making roles that are upstream maintainers, which a lot of people have mentioned. But I wanted to specifically call out AWS because they have a named role. So you might be a SWE 1 or a SWE 2 or a product manager or a program manager, but they also have a open source maintainer role, which makes it a much more durable agreement that you would work on open source than in a lot of other companies. Because I had always warned people, if you got hired to work on an open source project, that was usually only as durable as your manager, because it was an agreement with your manager. It was not a role within the company that the company identified and supported. But AWS is one of the first companies big companies I've seen that actually has a named job role that is now open source maintainer or open source upstream contributor. So that's super awesome. That was one point I wanted to make. And then Lucas, you mentioned one of the other points, which is both Lucas and Annie, through their contributions to other communities or the open source communities or projects, have grown in those roles, which drew attention to other companies or from other companies that were interested in those projects to offer them roles. So in some ways, in the bigger projects, there is an opportunity to contribute in order to gain, to my point, some of the status that we offer as reward in project, which then is translated to credibility and job offers potentially, or job interest at the very least, from the company to you, as opposed to you submitting a resume in and saying, hi, you've never heard of me, and your AI is going to chew on my resume and either spit it back out, or who knows what else happens. But you instead have that personal connection. You've built trust in the community. People that work for these larger companies know your work by, I can submit my GitHub URL as reference for the work that I've done. And then the jobs come to you in some cases.
Yeah, and I realized I forgot to introduce myself in the beginning.
Hi, this is Lucas. He's been working on Kubernetes since 2016. 15, okay. And we brought him to the first Cloud Native Computing Foundation hosted KubeCon in Seattle. For the first time, he gave a public talk, which was very exciting. Please finish your introduction. I just thought it was fun because I've been mentoring you for 10 years.
Yes, thank you very much. And yeah, the fun thing was that, I found the project when I was 15, and then wanted to try some things. The thing that I wanted to try was to run Kubernetes on Raspberry Pis, which didn't work. So I had a problem, a very concrete one. I tried to, fix that problem. And as it turns out, of course, a lot of other people tried to do that as well, or were interested in that as well. So by actually working with the open source community, then like it grew a following and kind of contributing that back to the open upstream project makes it so that, well, now it's not a problem anymore, and it hasn't been a problem since 8 years or something like that. What surprised me when I did that was, well, I got an email from a Google recruiter or something like that, like just a year after, or like half a year after, or something, like if I was interested in a leadership role with some, stuff at their at like Borg, so the predecessor to Kubernetes, which of course I wasn't qualified for the thing for that at 16. But like in reality, I wasn't ready. But of course, it was nice getting the mail, and then Sarah reaching out and going the extra mile of not just like clicking merge, but actually saying that, hey, do you want to help in other ways? And that's kept me going for 10 years now.
I would like to add something. I have a habit of saying controversial things, so really. My background is economics, and I've started 2 companies, and I had small exits, enough to buy a lake house, not enough to retire, so moderately successful. Has any of you heard the statement, open source maintainers owe you nothing? If you haven't, read it up. Right? So this basically means you can't demand that a maintainer works according to your schedule and fixes a bug so that you can keep your roadmap. You have to work with them, not demand from them. There's a corollary to that, and that is your users don't owe you anything if you are a maintainer. It's a common mistaken thinking is, I maintain the software, so somebody should pay me for it. You're making a statement. We're saying, we give this software away to anybody for any purpose for free. Nobody owes you anything because you do that. It's your own decision. So that's not a basis for making money. That said, there are 3 ways to make money. One is, you raise funding. Either revenue or startup funding. That's the startup route. You have a great technology, and you find people that want to fund it and make it into a viable product. The second one is, you use your brain and you sell development services. So you sell to somebody who wants a feature in this open source project that you develop that, and they pay you for that. So they don't actually necessarily pay you for doing open source work, they pay you to fix their problems. You're a consultant to a company. That's a very sustainable business model. There are many small companies, many small to medium-sized companies today that do this for 30 years. It's very valuable work, highly paid, and super stable because there's always a bug in the open source project that you're using. And oftentimes you don't have the developers on staff to do that.
There's always a bug in any software.
And there's another way. If you don't want to sell your own services, and if you don't want to raise money, then you need to work for somebody who values that this project is maintained. Usually these are big companies that see this project as a joint investment with the other companies you've seen on screen. So the key contributors to Kubernetes, they share the development cost. They see it as a joint investment. They say, we want this. This is something that we need to run our data centers. We could all do this by ourselves, but it costs 10 times as much as if we shared this with the community. And that's why we think that large industry-driven open source projects are joint development investments. So 3 ways: raise funding, sell your own services, or work for somebody who values that the software is maintained. And I think that summarizes 95% of all jobs in open source. There's some extraordinary cases, like you get hired by CERN, like a publicly funded organization that gets open source. Very rare. You find a donor. I have friends who were approached by somebody who's stupidly rich and wants to invest their money in a good way. That happens, but it's very, very rare. The 3 ways I explained are common, successful, and proven.
Yeah, any more to that?
I can just give an example. When we open positions these days, because there's so much activity in this area for cloud native, if we open a position, we actually get a lot of applications. The easiest way to find the best candidates, it's usually to use filters that trigger this kind of collaborations. I think these 3 ways of living out of open source are real, but there was a question before about making your own CV. And this is an added value, which is if you have these items in your CV, not only you will be found more easily when there's a large amount of applicants, you will kind of come to the top, I would say. But not only that, the community is so close and so active that I know who I should ask for more information. I don't have to even talk to you necessarily. I will know the people that you've been working for, and I will talk to them, and they will back you up. And this has a value because it's not you're no longer unknown. You're in the community. I know you're part of it, and this is really valued by CERN and by a lot more people because this is what we're looking for.
Really good example so far, and I can kind of pitch in with mine as well. So I started a consulting company a year ago around cloud-native topics and these kind of things. I've had to do zero sales and marketing, essentially. Well, everyone has to do some sales, but I haven't even made a LinkedIn post that I started this because people naturally know me. They ask for help. I help them, and then it kind of goes naturally from there. So there is really a big power in being part of the community, really understanding what the community is kind of looking for and needing, and then you can obviously do, and you probably have to do a community work as well, but that's a good investment as well as a fun thing, a good thing, and a great impact on the world of tech in general, so I don't find it at all bad. So, yeah, I think it's good, and I think there'll be really good examples before that as well from Lucas and everyone else.
And then we have one more question from here, and then we open it up to the questions from the audience. So consumption. So if you are in a company, large or small, and you are the consumer of open source software, how do you choose? How do you make the case for using open source software? Where, of course, as Sarah was pointing out, it's not like free as in sunshine that you just do the git clone once or npm install once, and then just your days are very free evermore. How do you make the case for doing something like that, where you actually have to sustain it versus just getting a provider, or maybe sometimes the best case is actually to buy from the maintainers. So let's start from.
I'm going to answer this in a weird way because besides what I said so far, I also worked 3 years in the automotive industry, and frankly, this kind of how do we properly, reasonably choose open source components, how do we make sure they're maintained, you will have to teach that to companies. We have companies like Microsoft and Google and others who grew up in this space. Sometimes we call them digital native companies. They know this process. But if you work for a machining company in Europe, they don't. Seriously, I'm not kidding. As I said, I teach this at university in Berlin, and I tell my students, if you learn the practical management of open source license compliance, like documenting all the licenses that you consume and making sure they're compatible with the licenses that you ship under, you're golden. You can graduate because this is an underserved skill everywhere. And that's just compliance. Compliance is a hard requirement if you want to ship products. Good processes are even worse. You will find that many companies maintain in-house forks or patches to standard projects just because they didn't understand how to upstream those patches to get rid of them, which adds massive cost and slows their integration process down. So it's a super valuable skill to invest time now into learning community processes and then going into companies and teaching them to work and integrate in those community processes. I always say engineering management today, which is where you all medium term want to end up, requires you to understand corporate proprietary software development and collaboration in the open source communities. These are the two ways that we work. 80% of our code is open source collaboration, 20% of our code is proprietary differentiating stuff. And you need to be comfortable in both of these fields. And I can say industry isn't there yet. This is a huge opportunity for all of you. Learn that, go there, teach them.
I'll go a slightly different direction. I'll offer all sorts of support for what you said, Mirko, and then take it sort of toward the open source secure supply chain concerns. So to the point about compliance and reteaching and teaching and continuing to educate the industries that didn't grow up with open source, automotive is still learning, by the way. In addition to all of that, you also have to teach them healthy software lifecycle management. They get it for proprietary, but those forks that Mirko talked about, sometimes they have forks because they didn't understand and they get stuck on a single particular version for years or ever. And then sometimes they don't take a copy of the software and then they ship something and they have no idea what they have shipped or how to fix it or if they're vulnerable for something because the compliance tracking wasn't as good as it could have been because they didn't take a copy of the upstream to keep track of it, to be able to be responsible for the software. It was sort of the free like sunshine idea. It's free, we'll throw it in, it's perfect. But you haven't paid attention to the security implications of it. And of course you have the challenges within most companies that anything bigger than a single small software development team really struggles with internally being able to share their information and open source capabilities, open source responsibility, and so you'll end up with just fragmentation beyond all belief. So these are all things that if you understand really well when you go into a job, you can speak to these problems and help educate, but it is a constant education process.
Yeah, the Conway law thing, who wants to?
I would just add one thing, because it was mentioned like open source versus proprietary, but one important part is what we mean by open source, and this is something we suffer quite a bit at CERN internally, which is sometimes it's open source because the code is open, and in many times it's our code, and we develop our in-house project, and the code is open, but it's still maintained just by us. We're still on our own, and this is not what open source means. Open source is like, I think it was the OpenStack Foundation, they used to have like the four opens. And you need all of them. You need all of them to actually have a sustainable project. And this keeps coming when we talk about internally about engaging with upstream, engaging with the communities, being active in the upstream communities. Very often teams will say, but our code is open as well. You can go and modify it. It's like, okay, but this is not what we're talking about here. Because if you're on your own, it's not the same.
A bit of a different take on me. I was kind of thinking there that, okay, contributing, how does it help the company and what benefits does it bring to a company? For example, a startup, since we are here in Aalto space. I've actually seen firsthand that in addition to, contributing to the ecosystem, saving time on development and all of these kind of points that everyone's brought up, is user acquisition is also in a lot of ways a lot easier because you have inbuilt, likely well not it's inbuilt, you have to work on the community. But I worked, for example, a scale up with an open source product where most of the, if we lost a case, so if the customer didn't buy an enterprise license, we actually lost it to the open source version of the company's product, which was then obviously fully open source. Everyone could contribute to the community build. So that you can, when you wrap your head around there, it's like, okay, the company's doing really, really well financially. Everything is working really well. The revenue is going up. But at the same time, the biggest competitor is also the open source version of it. I think that's actually quite a lovely situation to be in at, because it means that what you're building is really, really impactful and people and users really like it. And then obviously you have to find ways to keep both of the income streams steady and so forth. But it is quite nice for user acquisition and growth building from like a business perspective, in addition to obviously contributing to the ecosystem as well.
So now we'll take a couple of questions if there are. This yes. Whoever.
Everywhere we are seeing mentioning that we have to code and build an open source or contribute there. Let's say someone is not in coding, he is in automation or the QA. How does he contribute?
Oh, obviously. I was actually thinking about this question before, yeah.
So, every open source project that has more than maybe 2 maintainers on it needs all the associated roles with it to manage it that you would think of if you were in a company trying to build a product. So you need people who write documentation. You need designers to come up with logos. You need people who will project manage and make sure your meetings are running if you have meetings. You'll need people to, go through and look at your backlog and make sure that, you're answering questions or at least acknowledging when someone creates bugs. You need people to write CI/CD software or do testing. Like all of these things are needed in especially the larger open source projects. But in almost anything, you still need all of that glue work that goes around the coders. So I haven't coded and probably should not be allowed to code since probably 2002. I might have written a shell script or two since then, but I've been primarily actively working in open source projects since about 2005. And that has run a whole gamut of roles. But they've been project management, they've been advocacy, they've been documentation, they've been end user sort of conversations. There are so many things you can do in an open source project. Not every project recognizes this, so you kind of can rock up and go, hey, I can contribute with these are my skills, and start working on things. If the project doesn't value the work you're doing, there are others that will. So, look around. You can also look for help wanted issues in a lot of different projects, and some of them will be what we call the unglamorous work, and what we also referred to in Kubernetes as chopping wood and carrying water. It's the stuff that needs to happen, and we did a lot of work recognizing those contributions because they are sometimes invisible. It's not as easy to see them in GitHub, but it's also how the contributor experience working group came up. It's how the CNCF has started creating these much broader perspectives on this. But yeah, you are singing my song because there are so many things that need to be done to make a project. There needs to be marketing at some level for your project. This is how you get users. So all of these different roles are necessary to make a project successful.
Yeah, and the more senior you grow, the less coding you will do, but still the more impactful you will be.
And also, in addition to if you are fully non-technical and all of these words like documentation and all of these already scare you a bit, it doesn't have to be you, but if those feels already a bit foreign, there's so many places to start from, which is fully not even you don't have to even think about the technical side in some ways yet. So, for example, the local CNCF and Kubernetes meetup is always looking for people to help, which then would be, helping to organize events such as this. And obviously, there's no coding knowledge required to, put up an event and get speakers and whatnot, that kind of thing. So there's always these kind of things needed. And for example, from my side, I could probably do code contributions as well, but actually anytime I speak with a project and I ask what do they need help with, and then they kind of know who I am a bit and whatnot, they always need product marketing help, documentation, anything else than code really. Well, they probably need help with that as well, but at least for my skill set, they always go for something a bit different. So it could be actually that the other skills that you have could be even more demand than learning coding from start, for example. Because there's, as Sarah said, as everyone has said, there's so many different skills that are needed to make projects successful.
I asked this because most of the coding will now done by AI in the future.
Maybe. That's another question.
That's another question, actually. Let's take his question instead. Sorry, because, yeah.
We can get back to it, probably.
Oop, did we run out of battery?
It is that.
Oh, yeah, okay, take that one.
I will charge.
Yeah, actually I had a kind of similar question. I want to ask, what are you going to do with AI generated code? You know?
Okay, yeah, well then it's okay. If you ask it, it's okay, yeah.
Well, actually I had two questions.
You choose which one you want to do.
Well, you can choose which one you want to answer. And say, what do you think about NVIDIA now?
Sorry. Let's take the AI one. Let's take the AI one. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first. AI is a tool. We get new tools in software development life cycles all the time. Continuous development wasn't a thing 25 years ago. Continuous integration, not a thing. Automated documentation, not a thing. These are all new tools, so is AI. It's not going to supplant development. It is going to be another tool we integrate into our toolbox. And what I'll do is I'll make a statement, or I'll make a comment about NVIDIA to your thing. They are working on open source projects. They are working in them, and they are working to open source some of their projects. They're becoming very active. This is important. This is, again, that collaboration. And we need to find ways to use good tools to make our work better, to make it more trustworthy, to make it more stable, more sustainable. All of these things are super important. But is it going to change things? Absolutely. Is it going to take all of our jobs? Not in my lifetime.
Yeah, I think that was encouraging.
I don't know.
So here's
How
me
was my
again,
life?
saying controversial things. My background is, as I said, innovation economics, and I teach intellectual property. Copyright is to protect the creative work of humans. Code that comes out of your prompt is not copyrighted. Some lawyers might actually disagree on this. So. But what really happens is, you don't take that code and submit it as a pull request. You take it as inspiration, you rewrite it. I can say, I use GitHub Copilot a lot, it's an idiot. It writes really bad code. And I think that's not the point of Copilot, it's not to write good code. It is essentially your documentation. In the old days, you had like a meter of books over your monitors that contain all the API references. And Copilot has that memorized, and when you want to write something, it suggests the right function calls. But you still have to make sure the code is good. And I think this is why it will not replace us. It will make us more efficient. It might mean that if today some company needs 50 FTE developers, they might only need 25 in the future. Maybe. It also means that if you're a high-quality developer, somebody who knows how to write good code, you'll be in much more demand, because you can actually read and understand the junk that the AI generates, find out where it generates something that's acceptable and where you have to edit it. I can say I almost never take a line that is suggested and use it unchanged. And so I don't really believe that. I kind of agree with you here. So in terms of copyright, one question that we discussed earlier is, should projects accept AI-generated code? The counter question is always, how do you know? Right? Somebody submits a pull request, code looks bad. I suggest to the projects, just refuse the pull request. Say, this is bad code, here's the coding style, this is what the mistakes in this are, go fix it. It doesn't matter if that was an inexperienced programmer or an AI. And so this is how we deal with this at the moment. And there's one issue, that's volume. You may have heard the curl community's complaint this weekend, where they basically said, we get so many AI-generated security reports that are bullshit, that we now have to close this and not accept this anymore. So that's a problem. We have to learn how to deal with AI there properly. On the counterpart, we also use AI to reproduce issues. There was a huge, very, very interesting FOSDEM talk by the Mozilla Firefox developers about how to use automatic reproduction of issues with AI. So I think there are also some very promising approaches. But if AI will do one thing, it will raise the bar for what is a good programmer. It's again a chance for you to just be a really good programmer, very experienced, learn it the right way, and you'll be better than AI. Was that controversial enough? Maybe not.
I will add, I write less code than before, but I still write code. I have to say that I don't even bother writing code anymore if I don't have access to something like Copilot. And it's my experience. It's not replacing what I do. It's just a tool that does, I would say, 80% of the plumbing work that I had to do manually before. But there's no way I would ever submit code without going through it. It's just blind. It just doesn't exist. There's too much creativity on coding that is not there. But it is an incredibly helpful productivity tool. I was just thinking about it. Maybe it's a bad comparison, but when I was studying, there was a similar hype with this kind of service-oriented architecture where we would just define interfaces and code would just be auto-generated and everything would be magic. And all we had to build was these UML diagrams and everything would talk to each other. Now, if you went through this, this didn't really go anywhere. Like it does help, but if you thought by drawing some diagrams, the tools would talk to each other and things would actually happen. No, and I think it's the same. That we cannot just assume that AI will be replacing the job. All the creativity still has to be there.
What you thought about the UML diagram sounds like what people are pitching with AI engines, so that's going to be interesting.
I think everyone's going to have a really bit. I don't have too much to add, but just one thing I really like the kind of comparison, which is even more like kind of fundamental than the comparison is calculators and math. Like when calculators came in, it did not kill math. Math is still here. Mathematicians still have jobs. Math is happening. We are learning math every day, like in elementary schools and whatnot. But calculators, they most definitely are a great tool that's probably sped up a lot of calculation around the world. It's very helpful. Yeah, exactly. We don't want to do everything by hand.
How do a square root right now?
Exactly. So I think to me it's a continuation of that, exactly as everyone has already said here.
And with that, we're officially, as per our announced schedule, already all time. So,
One more question.
so are you okay? Okay, final question. You get the final.
Thank you. Well, my question is, consider a person as an individual developer or interested in entrepreneurship, the way of the startups. Now the question is regarding the factors that usually they can control. Obviously they can make wrong decisions and fail. But the other part that they might not have much control, I call it, let's say, government in this case. My biggest worry is that in case of Europe, since we are dealing with that, just having a national government is one side, that's one thing. Then we have the European Union as a whole, which is sort of working as a bigger government institution. And in some cases, we are dealing with more bureaucracy, more regulations, more waste of money in many cases without necessarily producing direct effect in many things. So in many cases, I believe that smaller startups or individuals that are trying to innovate are dealing with a system that rather than being helping, they are sort of enforcing and causing maybe roadblocks. So my general question in that regard is that if someone is interested in, let's say, in future development, especially in topics that are maybe controversial in some regards, because we already have AI regulation developing that's in the European Union, but not other countries, even though they are creating, let's say, more advanced in that regard. So my question is that how someone, as a smaller contributor that doesn't have much power in the, let's say, government or bigger agencies that are regulating this system, can approach this, and what's the experience like in that regard, given your very big experience in dealing with different organizations and industries? Yeah.
Who wants to start?
I can, I don't, you know.
Go for it.
All right. So first, you're right. I think some of you discussed this with me in one of the breaks. We're really making it quite hard in the European Union to start a startup company that is comparable to the situation that you find, for example, in the United States. It's very, like a simple example, you have this great idea, you get initial some seed funding, and you incorporate in Finland, and you put a job post out, and you get a great applicant from Spain. You can't just hire that person, because you have to have social security representation in Spain, and then you have to have a general manager, fund subsidiary, or go through a payroll provider. That adds 20% of the cost to the pay of the person. So yes, we're making this really hard, and I mean that's one thing that we're advocating in Brussels a lot, is that we need the integration of the internal market to be accelerated. But let's be realistic. This also means that we need to let go of things that we love, like our social security systems that are different between Finland and Germany. It's actually only different to like this much. Like your retirement pay will be slightly different and come half a year earlier or later. But why do we need two systems? Can we not make a compromise and like roll this out across the EU? Healthcare and all of these things. We think we have great systems, but they come with a huge overhead in terms of bureaucracy. And I think it can be improved in any situation like we do. In comparison, you can incorporate in, what is it?
Delaware?
Delaware. It takes you 45 minutes and a beer in terms of fee. And then you incorporate and you can work all over the United States. Like there's no problem hiring in New York after you did that. And I think that's the contrast that we have. And I think that's why an agile approach to starting a company and scaling it in Europe is much more difficult. So we need to work on this, but this is not just me. This is all of you. You need to talk to your own policymakers here. I think our biggest chance is the further development of the internal market. For the European Union, that's top priority. But there's a lot of resistance to changing anything that we came to love, like regulation on common bear. Yeah, so, sleep.
As the US person, I am fully unqualified to answer this.
I think Mirka's answer was really good already, and I think the calling for, let's say, simplifying some of the ways that startups can be built in Europe is a really, really good one. But I can give my 2 cents as a person who's recently started a company in the US, in Delaware specifically, that it's maybe easier, but it's not perfect either from my perspective. Like obviously it's really nice, the kind of one single market is really, really powerful. There's no kind of taking away from that. But I have to say that there's a lot of interesting details to some of the other regulations, at least I live in New York. For example, I recently got a mail that since my one-person company where I am employed, I should have a poster up in my workplace about workers' rights. And this is apparently a requirement that I should meet at any given time. And I'm like, okay, I'm a one person who's employing myself and I need to have this poster up at all times. Is this maybe the best use of my time? I'm not sure. And I know that Finland, for example, has similar regulations, but they usually kick in at the 17, 20 person mark. And it's kind of like after you reach that amount, then you are subject to these kind of rules, and then they are quite similar. But obviously, possibly, yeah, there's differences in the system, but it's not, perfect anywhere. And I would like to kind of see sometimes that European folks would also celebrate the stuff that Europe has really nicely as well, because there's really, really good reasons to start companies here as well. And I think we should also kind of be happy with those reasons.
Do you want to? I have nothing to add about anything, but I would just finalize. I just wish GPUs were less expensive.
Okay, so on that note, thank you everyone for the great presentation and panel. Thank you everyone here for attending, for the great questions, preparing this, and thank you everyone on our live stream that has been following as well. And yeah, see you next meeting.